Welcome to the channel. Today, we're exploring some unbelievable story. Stay tuned and let's dive in. I've always felt Emily and I had the type of marriage that everyone admired. Sure, my work as lieutenant captain on board the USS Columbia was not easy on the family. Long deployments and many hours were part of the deal. Still, I felt we had established a strong life together, one that could withstand any storm. Emily was the kind of woman who could keep it together even while I was thousands of miles away, or so I persuaded myself. My son, Ethan, had just turned 22 and was trying to find out his position in the world. He loved mechanics and was always tinkering in the garage. I wasn't always around to advise him, but I was pleased of the young man he was becoming. My beautiful baby, Chloe, was the light of my existence. I am 10 years old, full of questions and eternally interested. She had a way of making me feel like a hero every time I stepped in. Those times when she raced into my arms, yelling, "Daddy," took away the sting of being apart. Life aboard the ship was difficult and taxing, but it provided me with a feeling of purpose that I valued. Sailors have a particular camaraderie and knowledge of sacrifice. I found peace in knowing that my profession was meaningful, that I was providing for my family while also serving something greater than myself. I trusted Emily to hold the fort at home. When I was at home, I tried to make the most of it by having family meals, watching movies, and having private conversations with Emily after the kids were asleep. I believed we were a team, even if my job occasionally made her life more difficult. She constantly told me that she understood my job's demands and that she loved me for who I was. But recently, I observed something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Emily had become distant. At first, I attributed it to stress. Raising 2 children and running a family while I was abroad wasn't easy. But her grin seemed forced. Her chuckle is empty. She'd begun spending more time on her phone, excused herself to answer calls in the other room. When I questioned her about it, she dismissed me, claiming it was unimportant. During my last leave, I became more aware of her late-night messages, excuses about wanting to see a friend, and the way she avoided my touch. It all amounted to something I couldn't ignore. Part of me did not want to believe it. Emily, the woman I trusted with my heart and children, couldn't be concealing anything from me, could she? I tried to ignore the misgivings, to concentrate on the kids and enjoy my time at home, but the nagging sensation intensified. It was the way Ethan avoided eye contact when I inquired about how things had been while I was away, and the way Chloe, who is normally so free and exuberant, was quieter, as if she was holding on to a secret too huge for her little shoulders. I began to feel like a stranger in my own house. The box came on a lovely day, the kind of day that normally leaves me feeling satisfied. Emily had taken Chloe out, most likely to the park or the mall, while Ethan was out as usual. When I heard the knock on the door, I assumed it was for something dull, such as equipment I had bought or Navy paperwork. I signed for it without hesitation, sitting into my favorite recliner to open it. The contents include a file and a folded letter. Something about the calligraphy on the letter struck me as unusual and unfamiliar. As I opened the letter, my gut constricted. The first paragraph came at me like a tidal wave. "One is no more. He was smiling when he left us. He missed Chloe. She looks so much like him. When do you plan to come here, Natalie?" The words blurred in front of me for a time. Chloe looks so much like him. My mind raced as I reread the letter, attempting to fathom what it meant. Who the heck was Juan and why was Chloe being compared to him? With shaky hands, I opened the file. The first snapshot made my blood run cold. Emily was there, beaming in the arms of another guy, whom I did not know. The following several photos were much worse. They made my stomach flip. The two of them intertwined in personal moments that left no question. Each image seemed like a dagger cutting into my chest. And then I saw a snapshot of that guy with his arm around Emily and Chloe on his lap, beaming as if he were her father. It was a family photo, but it was not my family. For a minute, I was unable to move. I gazed at the photographs, my head filled with wrath that I could scarcely control. My jaw clenched so fiercely that I believed my teeth would break. I wanted to rush out of the home, confront Emily, and demand explanations. I wanted to yell at her, making her experience the same misery that was pouring through me. But then another idea entered my mind, which kept my hand immobile as I sought for my keys. If I rushed in now, I would give her the advantage. She'd weep, deflect, and tell a narrative about misunderstandings or blunders. And then there was Chloe, who I assumed was my kid. I needed to know the whole truth. Who was Juan? Was Chloe even mine? How long was this going on? Most importantly, how could I make Emily and that guy suffer as much as I was suffering right now? I gently folded the letter, returned the images to the file, and stashed them away in a locked drawer. My fury had not subsided, it was still simmering under the surface, waiting. But I was a Navy officer. I knew strategy and patience. Charging in without a strategy was a foolish approach. This wasn't just about treachery. This was about reclaiming what was mine. Or, if it couldn't be reversed, making Emily and her boyfriend pay the consequences for wrecking my life. I sat in that chair for hours, looking at nothing as my mind raced through options. When Emily and Chloe returned, I welcomed them as if nothing had occurred. Emily grinned at me, and I had to resist the temptation to yell at her, pull her into the kitchen, and hurl the proof at her face. But I held back. Instead, I kissed Chloe's forehead and told her I missed her. I wasn't going to allow her or him see me crumble just yet. When I hit back, it would be on my terms and the consequences would be disastrous. The following morning, I chose to deliver the box to a person I trusted, my commanding officer, Captain James Carter. He was a guy of few words but a bright mind, someone who had seen enough of life to comprehend its complexity. I knew I couldn't handle this alone, not if the images and letter were even half as bad as they seemed. Walking inside his office, I felt the weight of the situation bear down on me. When I arrived, he glanced up from his desk and beckoned for me to lock the door. Without saying anything, I put the present on his desk and sat down. "Captain," I murmured, my voice firm despite the turmoil within me. "I need your help with this." He opened the gift and flipped through the photos and message. His expression showed no emotion or surprise. When he got to the picture of Emily and Chloe with the other guy, he put it down, folded his hands, and looked me in the eye. "Lieutenant Commander, this is a delicate matter," he said calmly. He then took one of the images and inspected it carefully, his eyes narrowing slightly. He rose up and went over to the wall behind his desk, where a giant photograph of a desert scene hung, one he had brought back from an operation in Nuevo Leon, Mexico, years before. "This," he said, putting up the image, "is from Santa Rosa. That hill in the backdrop is just like the one in this photo," he said, pointing to the image on the wall. I leaned forward, my thoughts whirling. Santa Rosa. Emily had never mentioned going to Mexico. My mind raced as I attempted to connect the life I imagined we had with this discovery. "When did your wife go to Mexico?" he inquired, his tone measured but questioning. "I don't know," I said, my voice breaking for the first time. "She never told me." Captain Moore looked at me for a minute, his eyes penetrating as if he were judging not just my words, but also my soul. Then, without saying anything, he moved to his phone and made a few calls. His voice was calm and commanding, but I couldn't understand what he said. A few minutes later, the door opened and 3 guys entered. I knew them right away: Eric, Mark, and Andrew. They were among an elite cadre of intelligence and covert operations experts. These were guys who weren't brought in for minor issues. "Gentlemen," Captain Moore began, nodding to the images on the desk. "We have a predicament that demands your expertise. Lieutenant Commander Jonathan has given us something that requires a closer look." Eric took up the images and flipped through them with the precision of a man trained to spot nuances that others may overlook. Mark and Andrew looked at the message and the photos with the Santa Rosa backdrop. "This one," Eric said, holding up the family portrait, "is faked. The man in the image isn't just any random person. That's Miguel Castillo. He is a recognized member of a cartel operating out of Guadalajara." My breath caught. A cartel? What the heck was Emily getting herself into? Andrew joined in. "If Alvarez was in Santa Rosa and Chloe was with him, then your wife has ties to something much deeper than just infidelity," he told me. "This isn't only a betrayal of your marriage, Lieutenant Commander. Depending on what she knows or is engaged in, this might be a violation of national security. A military officer's wife involved with cartel scum. That's not good." Captain Moore nodded, his face bleak. "Lieutenant Commander, you need to stay calm and let us handle this," a voice remarked. "The safety of your family and maybe others is at stake." We'll look into this and find out what's going on. Meanwhile, maintain normality at home. Don't tell her anything. I nodded, the gravity of the situation sinking in. What began as a personal betrayal has escalated into something far more terrible. Emily wasn't just unfaithful. She could be involved in something that threatens everything I've ever stood for. As I exited the workplace, the weight of the day weighed down even more. My rage had not subsided, but it was now mixed with worry for Chloe, Ethan, and the life I believed we had. I promised to myself that no matter what it took, I would find out the truth and defend my family, even if it meant breaking the globe apart. Captain Moore sat back in his chair, his fingers curled behind his chin as he considered the matter. The guy could dominate a room just by being there. After a few seconds of stillness, he looked at Andrew, his countenance serene but concentrated. Andrew, he added, his voice firm, I want you to start looking into when and how Emily Smith got to Mexico. Determine who accompanied her, who she met with, and where she remained. We need to create a chronology and linkages. This might just be a personal matter, but it could also be far more severe. Let's not leap to judgments before we have all the information. Andrew nodded, immediately taking notes. I will begin with travel records. If she crossed the border or flew, there will be paperwork. I will also look for any surveillance video, money transactions, or strange conversations. Captain Moore turned his eyes back to me, his demeanor softening slightly. Lieutenant Commander, I understand this is a personal matter, but if there is any suggestion of a wider problem here, anything that may threaten national security, we must approach it with the seriousness it deserves. For the time being, we will keep this secret. Only the guys in this room and the investigators will know. You have my word. I nodded, even though my thoughts was racing. The concept that Emily's conduct may go beyond petty adultery and endanger the nation was nearly impossible to conceive. I wanted to fight, insist that this had to be an error. However, the images in the letter spoke volumes. Andrew interrupted my thoughts. Do you know if Emily has any relatives or friends in Mexico? Is there anybody she may have visited? No, I said, shaking my head. She never said anything like that. As far as I knew, her only connections were here in the United States. Eric said, that doesn't mean anything. People may have ties that they don't discuss, particularly if they are keeping something private. Captain Moore arose and paced slowly. Jonathan, he remarked, his tone becoming somewhat more personal, you are an excellent cop. I've seen you manage high-pressure circumstances previously, and I'm certain you'll do the same here. However, your first goal right now is to maintain your composure. Go home, pretend as if everything is normal, and allow us the time we need to investigate. Going home, staring Emily in the eyes and pretending I didn't know anything seemed like a Herculean job. But I saw the significance of keeping this controlled. If she felt I was onto her, the investigation and our safety may be jeopardized. Eric, Mark, and Andrew exited the room, each with a purpose. Captain Moore leaned against his desk and locked his piercing eyes on me. Jonathan, I'm not sure where this will go, but I guarantee we'll get to the bottom of things. If this is just a personal betrayal, we will handle it discreetly. However, if it is more, we will safeguard you and your family. I nodded and swallowed hard. Thank you, sir, I said, my voice strained. As I walked out of the office and returned to my vehicle, the weight of everything threatened to crush me. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about Chloe and Ethan and the life I believed we had. Emily's secrets had become my responsibility, and I wasn't sure what I'd find out. But one thing was certain, I would not stop until I got answers. That evening, I stepped inside my home as if I were entering a war. However, this time, the adversary was inside my own walls. Emily's cooking odors floated through the air, and Chloe's laughing could be heard in the living room. It was a scenario that had once filled me with joy, but now it seemed hollow, as if everything I valued was nothing more than a neatly crafted mirage. Emily welcomed me with her customary warmth and a grin that, in retrospect, was almost too beautiful. Hey, honey, she murmured, putting her arms around my neck. Dinner is nearly ready. How was your day? Long, I said, keeping my voice even. I carefully drew away, avoiding her gaze. The weight of what I knew made it difficult to look at her. As the evening progressed, I concentrated on Chloe, assisting her with her schoolwork and listening to her enthusiastically about her day at school. It was a nice diversion, a reminder of what was most important. Ethan, as usual, was in his room, most likely working on his computer. He was at an age when he liked his own company, yet tonight I coveted his independence. Emily, on the other hand, appeared to know that something was wrong. After Chloe went to bed, she approached me in the kitchen, her voice gentle and questioning. "Is everything all right? You have been quiet all evening." "I'm fine," I said, without meeting her eyes. "Just tired." She didn't push any further, but as we prepared for bed, her motives became clearer. She changed into something that would have previously turned my head, a sheer nightgown that left nothing to the imagination. She crawled into bed alongside me, her fingers tracing over my chest. "You've been so distant lately," she muttered, her tone seductive. "I miss you." Her touch, which had previously provided warmth and connection, now seemed strange, even unpleasant. My thoughts turned to the photographs, those of her with another guy. Their closeness was shown in ways I couldn't unsee. I gently moved her hand away and rolled onto my side. "I'm just really tired tonight, Emily." She stopped, letting her touch linger for a time before withdrawing. "You've been tired a lot lately," she observed, her voice hurtful. I did not react. I could not. Any words I spoke would either expose what I knew or explode into the rage simmering under the surface. She turned over with a sigh, and the room went silent, interrupted only by the steady hum of the ceiling fan. I gazed at the wall, my thoughts racing. Was she thinking about him? Does she miss him? Or was this simply another part of her deception to keep me blind? The days that followed were a whirl of deliberate avoidance. I created reasons to remain at work later, brought Ethan out for errands, and spent extra time with Chloe. At night, I fueled my tiredness by retiring into the shelter of sleep, or at least the appearance of it. Every contact with Emily seemed like a test of my commitment. She'd grin, laugh, and touch me as if nothing was wrong, and I'd nod, giggle half-heartedly, and draw back just enough to maintain my distance. It was a fine line, acting close enough to avoid suspicion while keeping her at arm's length to protect my sanity. The toughest thing, however, was waiting. Waiting for Andrew and the others to reveal the truth. I was waiting for the right opportunity to face her, equipped with incontrovertible evidence. Waiting to discover whether the lady I loved had genuinely vanished, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. Throughout it all, one idea stood out above the rest: I would protect my children no matter what happened. Even if it meant wrecking the life I thought we had. When Captain Moore summoned me to his office, I couldn't shake my feeling of dread. Something about his demeanor, the way he avoided looking straight at me, the rigidity in his movements, told me the news wouldn't be pleasant. "Sit down, Jonathan," he continued, his tone surprisingly calm. He slipped a tumbler of whiskey over the desk, towards me. "You're going to need this." I paused, my throat dry and my thoughts racing. This was not standard practice. I accepted the glass, took a short drink, and braced myself. Andrew walked forward, his expression stern. "Sir," he started, his voice low and deliberate, "we have some information, and I'm not going to sugarcoat them. This is going to be difficult to hear." I just nodded, the glass in my fingers wobbling slightly. "Abigail," Andrew said, "has been having a long-term affair with a guy called Carlos. He married Natalie. They do not have children of their own, but they were quite active in Abigail's childhood." I felt blood draining from my face. I grasped the desk's edge, attempting to keep myself steady while Andrew continued. "About 9 years ago, Carlos spent a few days in the United States. During that time, he met Abigail and drove her to a hotel far outside the city. We were able to collect video evidence of their arrival, which showed them in the same vehicle and holding hands when checking in. I had to persuade the hotel management to dig out the old film, but we found it." Andrew slipped a file across my desk, but I did not examine it. My stomach churned. "What happened 9 years ago?" "That's when Chloe was born." "She's always known, Jonathan," Andrew said, his tone steady. "Chloe is registered as a Mexican citizen. She owns both a Mexican and an American passport. Abigail, on the other hand, has been traveling back and forth using a phony Mexican passport, which is why her US passport shows no trace of those travels. She has been seeing Carlos on a regular basis while remaining under the radar. My jaw constricted. My knuckles were white as I tightened my hands. With each word he uttered, the treachery became deeper. We've also uncovered more images, added Andrew, ones that confirm Chloe is aware of Carlos as her biological father. I could not breathe. The world seems to tilt under me. My thoughts whirled. My mind raced, but none of it made sense. And Ethan? I coughed out. What does he know? Andrew exchanged glances with Captain Moore before responding. We don't have the full picture yet, but it appears he was complicit. Abigail is most likely the source of the pressure. He's old enough to grasp what's going on, but we are still figuring out the scope of his participation. Captain Moore eventually broke his silence. Jonathan, he replied, his voice stern but not harsh, I know this is personal and I understand how much this hurts. However, the phony passports, secrecy, and long-term deceit make this more than simply a family issue. It's a network of falsehoods that transcends borders and may jeopardize national security. We will continue to investigate, but you must determine how you want to proceed personally. I nodded numbly, unable to formulate words. My world, my family, had been ripped apart by unexpected revelations. But one thing was certain, I was not going to sit idly by. Abigail had deceived me in ways I could never have imagined. And if she believed she could maintain her web of falsehoods, she had misjudged me. Thank you, sir, I eventually said, my voice scratchy. Keep me updated. As I left Captain Moore's office, my mind was racing with ideas of revenge, justice, and heartache. Abigail had ruined all I thought we had. I wasn't sure I could ever trust again. But one thing was certain, I would not go down gently. This was not over. That evening, I drove home with a weight so heavy that I could hardly breathe. The treachery and lies consumed me. When I drove into the driveway, I sat in the vehicle for a time, holding the steering wheel and attempting to gather the courage to confront the mess my family had become. Inside, the home was strangely silent. Only Ethan was home, sitting on the sofa, holding his phone. He glanced up as I entered, his demeanor cautious. Where is your mom? I inquired, my tone showing the stress I felt. She took Chloe and went to Grandma's, Ethan said bluntly. Said Grandma wasn't feeling well. I froze. My imagination quickly jumped to the worst-case scenario. Was she running? Hiding? Trying to clean up her mess before I discover more? I took out my phone and dialed Captain Moore. Sir, I said, Abigail departed with Chloe. She is supposed to be with her mother. Can we follow her movements? Already working on it, Jonathan, he said. We'll keep you updated. After hanging up, I turned to face Ethan. He was gazing at me, his brow wrinkled. Sit down, I urged, gesturing to the armchair opposite from me. We need to talk. He hesitated but agreed, slouching into his chair like a grumpy adolescent. For a minute, I was unable to speak. This was my son, my firstborn, my pride, and he knew about Abigail's betrayal. He'd been complicit. And the truth was ripping me apart. Why have you betrayed me? I eventually inquired, my voice cracking. Why would you cover up your mother's lies? Ethan's face contorted in wrath. Betray you? You got it wrong, Dad, he snapped. Mom said you knew about Carlos. She stated you were cool with it, that you had an agreement that if you were deployed, Carlos would remain here since you couldn't be there for her. I looked at him, shocked. She told you I was okay with her sleeping with him? I demanded. Yeah, Ethan yelled, his voice full of rebellion and misery. She said it was your idea. That you allowed him to sleep in your bed with her while you were gone. Dad, I despised you for it. I believed you were a coward for letting it happen, for allowing Chloe to grow up believing Carlos was her father while you just looked the other way. I felt a flood of rage and sadness rush through me. Abigail had not only deceived me, but she had poisoned my connection with Ethan by telling him falsehoods to excuse her adultery. Ethan, please listen to me, I pleaded, my voice cracking. None of this is true. I did not know. I had no clue what Carlos or your mother were doing. I would never, ever tolerate anything like that. Do you hear me? He stared at me with a troubled gaze. But she said, he began. I shut him off. She lied to you. To safeguard herself. To make you believe this was normal. To make you believe I was complicit. She lied to me, you, and Chloe. She lied to every one of us. Ethan's resolve started to weaken. His shoulders dropped and tears filled his eyes. I didn't know, he muttered. I did not know, Dad. I assumed you were okay with it. I didn't want to believe it, but Mom was very convincing. I stretched out and placed a hand on his shoulder. I understand, son. I know, I said gently. This is not your fault. You were caught in the center of something you couldn't grasp. But you now know the reality, and we must work together to get through this. Ethan nodded and wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his shirt. I'm sorry, Dad, he said. I should have asked you. I should have trusted you. I'm sorry, too, I responded, my voice full with passion. I'm sorry you had to grow up in this mess. I apologize for all your mother and I have put you through. But we'll repair it together. For the first time in what seemed like an eternity, I saw a flicker of trust in his eyes. We sat there for a long time, talking about everything Emily, Chloe, and the Fosses would both been told. It wasn't simple or ideal, but it was a start. As I sat with my kid, I had a fresh feeling of purpose. Emily had attempted to ruin my family with her Fosses, but she hadn't yet succeeded. I still had Ethan, and I was willing to do whatever it needed to safeguard what remained of my family. My phone buzzed that evening as I sat in the living room, looking at the family photos on the mantel. It was Rob. His voice was low and methodical as he talked. We've got our eyes on Emily, he added, his tone tight. She's in Mexico, staying with Natalie. I felt a torrent of emotions rush through me, including rage, betrayal, and a strange sensation of relaxation. At least we knew where she was. What is she doing there? I inquired, attempting to keep my voice calm. We are still getting intelligence, Rob said, but she's remaining quiet. We haven't seen Chloe yet, but we are positive Emily brought her. Local authorities have been notified and we are actively following her activities. Here's the point, however, Rob went on. If we seek to seize her in Mexico, there is a strong possibility that she may flee. Bribery is prevalent there, and if she finds out what's going on, she may go forever. The weight of his remarks struck me like a ton of bricks. The notion of Emily evading punishment and vanishing with Chloe made my fury boil. So, what should we do? I inquired, my voice hard. We wait, Rob said firmly. The aim is to allow her to return to the United States on her own. We will take her into custody as soon as she reaches the border. It's safer this way, with less area for her to move or perform any tricks. The prospect of waiting was awful, but I knew why. Still, the thought of Emily continuing her Fosses while Chloe was likely caught in the midst made my stomach turn. And how about Chloe? She asked. What if she is in danger? We are keeping an eye on them both, Rob told me. We haven't seen any signs of immediate danger. Chloe seems to be safe for now. The greatest thing you can do is remain put and prepare for when the time comes. After I hung up, I sat there for a while, my mind racing. I despised the thought of doing nothing, waiting for Emily to make her next move. Every fiber of my being wanted to storm down to Mexico, bring her back, and force her to accept the consequences of her actions. But I knew better. This wasn't just about me. It was about Chloe, Ethan, and determining the true extent of Emily's treachery. Ethan entered the room, his look wary. Is everything okay? He asked. I forced a faint grin. Not really, son, I said, but we have a plan. Your mom is in Mexico. The authorities are following her and will arrest her as soon as she returns. His face dropped. So we'll simply wait, he asked. For now, I replied. But, Ethan, I want you to realize something. This is not over. And when she does return, we'll get to the bottom of this. I refuse to let her lies pull us apart anymore. He nodded, but I could see tension in his eyes. How about Chloe? Ethan asked. I'll do everything in my power to bring her home, I responded firmly. But we need to be patient. We will get her back, Ethan. I promise you. That night, I laid in bed, looking at the ceiling and unable to sleep. My mind was racing with ideas of Emily's treachery, Chloe's safety, and the next actions I'd take after she returned to the United States. For now, I had to remain patient. But when the time came, I'd be prepared. Emily would face justice and my family would begin to heal, whatever long it took. The call arrived late in the afternoon. Rob's words sliced through the peaceful hum of my kitchen like a knife. "Jonathan, you need to come down here," he urged, his voice frantic. "They have Emily, but there is a problem. Chloe is harmed. Bad." My heart has stopped. "What happened?" I inquired, my voice shaking. "It is a lengthy tale. Just come here as quickly as possible. We are at the border station." I grabbed my keys and was out the door in minutes. The trip seemed like an eternity. Despite the fact that I exceeded the speed limit the whole trip, my mind raced, repeating every option and worst-case scenario. Chloe. Chloe is kind and innocent. What did she do to deserve any of this? When I arrived, the situation was pandemonium. Patrol vehicles and ambulances were everywhere, their lights blazing like furious beacons. Rob greeted me at the boundary, his countenance bleak. "Rob, what the hell happened?" I demanded. He sighed deeply and rubbed a palm over his face. Natalie drove Emily and Chloe back over the border. We had cops following them, maintaining a low profile. Natalie must have realized they were being followed. She panicked and bolted. A high-speed chase occurred, but Natalie lost control and smashed her automobile. My stomach sank. "Chloe," I whispered. "Natalie's dead," Rob whispered, his voice breaking. "Emily is injured but still alive. She is in custody." "Chloe." He shook his head. "Chloe absorbed the brunt of the impact. She is in critical condition. They airlifted her to the nearest trauma center." I stumbled back, the world shifting under my feet. Rob grasped my arm to keep me stable. "You can see Emily, but we must move quickly if you want to get to the hospital. Chloe is going to need you." I nodded, my thoughts already going to my kid. But first, I needed to confront Emily. They had her in the back of a police cruiser, shackled and looking worse for wear. Her face looked pallid, and her hair was matted with blood. She glanced up as I approached, her eyes wide with fright. "Jonathan," she said, her voice cracking. "I'm so sorry." "Don't," I said abruptly, cutting her short. "Don't dare. Not now." She trembled, and I had a glimpse of the lady I once loved. But my rage was too great, and the sight of her, of all she had done, made my blood boil. "Chloe's in critical condition because of you," I added, my voice quiet but vehement. "You endangered her. You lied. You cheated. And now this." Emily cried, but I couldn't force myself to care. I turned on my heel and went away. Rob drove me to the hospital, and the stillness between us was oppressive. When we got there, a nurse escorted me to the ICU. Chloe lay there, surrounded by machinery, her petite body torn and wounded. My knees weakened at the sight. I slipped into the chair beside her bed and took her little hand in mine. "I'm here, sweetheart," I murmured. "Dad is here. You are going to be fine." Ethan appeared soon after, his face pallid and drawn. He hesitated in the doorway, apprehensive. "Dad." He spoke softly. "Is she going to be okay?" I gestured for him to enter. "She needs us now," I murmured, my voice full of sorrow. "Whatever happens, Ethan, we are her family. We will get through this together." As we sat there, maintaining watch over Chloe, I felt a steely determination harden within me. Emily had broken our family apart, but I refused to let her ruin what remained. Chloe would fight, and so would I, for her, for Ethan, and for the opportunity to repair our broken lives. The phone arrived in the early morning hours, just as the thin light of dawn began to filter through my window. My heart dropped as I saw the hospital's number on my phone. "Mr. Smith." The voice on the other end spoke softly. "This is Dr. Lawrence." The words that followed destroyed whatever was left of my spirit. "Isabella has passed away." For a little period, I was unable to breathe. I looked at the phone in my hand, as if it had betrayed me. The world seemed quiet and chilly, with those words crushing down on me like a heavy blanket. "Isabella." My tiny daughter. I cradled the kid as a newborn, trained him to ride a bike, and read him goodnight tales. She wasn't my blood, but she was my daughter in every way that counted. And now she was gone. Emily's lies and treachery have ripped me from my life. I went to the hospital to visit her one last time. She seemed serene, as if she was sleeping, yet the machinery surrounding her was suddenly quiet. I sat by her bedside, holding her hand like I had done only days before. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," I said quietly, tears flowing down my cheeks. "I should have protected you. I should have realized the reality sooner. You did not deserve this." The loss was overwhelming, but behind it, a fire of rage and determination blazed brighter than ever. Emily had stolen everything from me, including my family, trust, and now Isabella. She had ruined our lives via her lies, greed, and illegal activities. That afternoon, I filed for a divorce and full custody of Ethan. I didn't mind how long it took or how much it cost. I expected Emily to suffer the consequences of her actions. She was already facing felony charges for Mann Act breaches, using a fraudulent passport, and narcotics trafficking. And the cocaine discovered in the automobile was just the tip of the iceberg. Emily had lied to me for years, but the judicial system would not allow her falsehoods to go unchecked. I'd make certain of that. The funeral was a tiny and intimate ceremony. Ethan and I stood side by side, paralyzed with sadness, saying our last goodbyes to Isabella. I made her a silent pledge that I would fight for justice. Not only for myself, but for her. The days that followed were a haze of legal proceedings and emotional weariness. Ethan and I clung to one another, attempting to regain some sense of normality in the aftermath of everything. He was also struggling, angry at his mother, upset by the death of his sister, and apprehensive about the future. "Dad," he murmured one night, as we sat in the living room, the stillness between us thick. "Do you believe we will ever be okay again?" When I gazed at him, my sole surviving kid, I felt a rush of remorse and determination. "We will, Ethan," I said firmly. "We've gone through hell, and we are still standing. We will get through this together." But even as I shouted those words, I knew the path ahead would be difficult. Emily's treachery had left wounds that would never completely heal. Isabella's death left a wound that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I would put my anguish into action. Abigail, no, Emily, believed she could lie, deceive, and manipulate her way through life without repercussions. But she was mistaken. Justice would be served, and Emily would be held accountable for all of her transgressions. I sat in the courtroom, looking straight ahead while the judge talked. His words pierced through the air with finality, echoing in my chest. Emily's trial had been a nightmare I never imagined I'd have to face. I had always trusted her, loved her, and thought we were a team. But as I listened to the judge's comments, I felt the same betrayal rip through me again. She had attempted to rationalize everything and make justifications for her conduct, but nothing made sense. She informed the court that Carlos was seeing his daughter, thus it was okay for her to take Isabella to Mexico. She spoke it coldly, as if she did not realize the significance of her actions. How could she have said that? Isabella, my little child, had died. Gone. Emily was still attempting to defend her acts, as if they were somehow excused. She had used a bogus, illegal passport to lure our daughter over the border into a life of drugs and violence. As the judge resumed his rant, I clutched my chair's arms hard. "Why did you use a phony passport?" he inquired, his voice rising with outrage. "Why don't you use your original passport? You were not only betraying your husband, but also your nation, the same land he fought for, by engaging in an unethical connection with criminals who aimed to subjugate mankind via drugs. Your husband was away, doing everything for his nation, while you were busy playing house with drug lords." The words hurt, but they were true. Emily had taken mine and our family's lives, putting all we had created at risk. She jeopardized Ethan and Isabella. She had endangered me. But more importantly, she had betrayed all I stood for. She had soiled the love and dedication I had shown her for years. The judge's statements were harsh but justified. His censure reflected Emily's decisions, which had devastated lives. As he went on, I felt my blood boil. But this time, it wasn't the scorching wrath of betrayal that had devoured me before. This time, I felt a dismal sense of justice taking form. You are a menace to society, the court said, and your crimes will not go unpunished. The court finds you guilty on all charges. A maximum penalty will be levied. You will do time for drug trafficking, child endangerment, and putting numerous lives in peril. I hardly heard the remainder of the sentence since the weight of it all was on me. Emily would be away for a long time. The lady I'd loved and trusted was suddenly nothing more than a crook. Her actions had resulted in the loss of my daughter, the devastation of my family, and the disintegration of the life we previously had. But even as the court processes concluded and the finality of the ruling became clear, I felt a peculiar emptiness within. Justice had been served, indeed. But it did not bring Isabella back. It did not erase the agony, betrayal, or heartache. Emily's words were a meager comfort in light of all I'd lost. I left the courtroom feeling empty. The guilt of not recognizing the truth sooner, of not safeguarding Isabella, of failing to see what was going on right in front of my eyes gnawed at me. Emily's sentence would provide neither serenity nor consolation. She would pay for what she had done, but I had to accept that I couldn't protect the people I cared about when they needed me the most. As I walked out of the courtroom, the loud sound of the gavel still echoing in my ears, I vowed myself that I would rebuild. For Ethan. For Isabella. All I had left was my kid and the memories of my little daughter. And in the end, that would have to enough. 3 days later, Captain Moore summoned me into his office. He brought me a drink and sat down after a lengthy wait. Revenge, he continued quietly, almost testing me. Are you sure that's what you want? I stared at him with amazement. Revenge? I said, uncertain what he meant. Captain Moore nodded slowly. I want to make sure you understand the consequences of your actions before you make any decisions. I did not respond straight away. The prospect of terminating Emily's life, taking her breath away, like she had done to Isabella, felt like a release, an end to all the suffering. But I needed to be certain. Was I willing to breach that line? Would I be able to handle the consequences? After a long while, I stared at Captain Moore and knew. There would be no going back. Every breath she takes is an abomination, I murmured, my voice colder than I had imagined possible. I want her dead. I don't believe in punishment. I'm a warrior. The war ends when the enemy is dead. I could hear a thick and oppressive hush descend about us. Captain Moore did not flinch, he merely nodded, as if he expected nothing less. The guy sitting across from me was no stranger to the world I was suddenly eager to explore. He had seen it all, the turmoil, the killing, the decisions that did not set well with a man's soul but had to be taken nevertheless. And now he was providing me a way out, an end to this. He didn't say anything immediately. Instead, he gave me the phone. There is only one number saved in the contact list, he informed me. Call him. Tell him you want to order a bowl of soup. Speak no less, speak no more. Send him the image of Emily and then destroy the phone. That's all. No trace. His words were simple, but they lingered in the air like a promise. This was it. There would be no turning back once I made that decision. There was no turning back to the guy I once was, the one who believed in justice, loyalty, and love. The guy who fought for his nation and sought to defend his family. But now I didn't know who I was. Had I become something darker? Is there anything more dangerous? I gazed down at the number in my fingers, feeling the weight of the choice against my chest. I wasn't sure whether I was prepared to make the call, but a part of me, the fighter in me, knew it was too late. I'd made my choice the instant I lost Isabella. This was just the next step. I'll do it, I answered, my voice calm but laced with something colder than I'd ever experienced. Captain Moore did not flinch. He gave me a tiny nod, rose up, and approached the door. Don't hesitate, he urged quietly but with understanding. When you're in this business, there's no room for second-guessing. Once you make the call, it's over. A shiver went down my spine. The gravity of what I was about to do sunk in my gut. I had no idea what would happen next, but I knew one thing: when I clicked that dial button, everything changed. I rose up and went out of the room, feeling the weight of my choice on my shoulders. I could feel the world shifting under my feet. I sat in my vehicle, hand squeezing the phone so hard that my knuckles became white. The weight of it all crushed down and suffocated me. My mind raced, 1,000 contradictory ideas swarming about as I gazed at the phone in my palm. There was no turning back from this. There was no way to erase the route I had just begun traveling down. I'd made my choice, but I hadn't realized how definitive it was until now. I have always been a guy who believed in duty, fairness, and honor. What about now? Now I was just like the crooks I'd spent my whole career battling. The reality was, I had transformed into a monster, and I had simply signed away my soul to ensure Emily's payment. I took a long breath to settle myself. There was no going back. Not now. When I pushed the dial button, everything changed. The telephone rang 3 times. The thud rang through the silence of my automobile, a reminder that I was doing something I would never be able to undo. Then the connection snapped and a man's voice came through, flat and unemotional. Hello. I took a minute to catch my breath. I want to order a bowl of soup, I replied, my voice cooler than I had imagined. There was no hesitancy. No second guessing. I'd made my decision, and now it was time to follow through. The line became quiet. A beat passed, followed by another. The call was immediately terminated without a word being said. I gazed at the screen for a long time. The weight crept further into my chest. Did I just make a mistake? Was I going to lose myself completely? The question bothered me, but there was no time for remorse. I had crossed the boundary and now had to face the consequences. A few seconds later, the phone buzzed. A fresh message emerged from the guy. He had texted a bowl emoji, which was simplistic and devoid of feeling. The message that followed chilled me to the core. 3 days, till Emily's life ended. It took 3 days for everything I had been and battled against to come to a head. I swallowed hard, attempting to breathe through the lump that had developed in my throat. What did I do? I put down my phone and peered ahead, seeing and hearing nothing. For a little while, I reflected on what I had just done. Was this the guy I hoped to be? Was this the guy I'd become? But there was no longer any place for questioning. There was no going back. I had made the call, and now time was running out. 3 days. I drove home, the consequences of my actions weighing hard on me. The world seemed distant and blurry, as if I were no longer a part of it. My thoughts kept returning to Isabella, my little girl, and the life I'd sworn to safeguard. Emily had stolen everything from me. Now it was time for her to pay. I couldn't get myself to feel satisfied. Not yet. Just a peculiar emptiness. This was the cost of vengeance. I'd been a soldier my whole life, fighting for a cause and believing in honor. But today, as I drove through the streets, I couldn't help but question whether I was really any better than the guys I had been taught to combat. 3 days. I had 3 days until everything changed. Until our world ended. I wasn't sure I'd be able to deal with the repercussions. The phone rang as I sat in the living room, looking blankly at the wall. My mind was a jumbled mess, churning with rage, remorse, and something worse that I couldn't quite put my finger on. The previous few days had passed in a haze, but the truth of what I had done was beginning to strike me like a freight train. I had crossed a boundary, and now I had to deal with the consequences. No amount of reason or logic could undo what had occurred. Isabella had died, but I was still here, plagued by who I had allowed myself to become. I went for my phone without thinking. My mother-in-law's voice broke through my veil of thoughts, her cries striking me like a smack in the face. Michael, Abigail has died. She wailed. The ladies in jail murdered her. They snatched my innocent kid from me. For a minute, I was unable to answer. I had not anticipated this. I did not expect to feel anything when I received the news. But her words, her grief, fueled something within me that I hadn't realized was still there. I tightened my jaw so tightly that my teeth ached. An innocent child. I spat out, barely able to contain my rage. Do you really believe that? Do you honestly believe Abigail was innocent? I stood up, pacing the room, my hands trembling with wrath. She ruined my life. She ruined our family. Our daughter's life. And you sat there, covering her misdeeds. You defended her. You covered for her. And you want to mourn her as if she were a saint. Her screaming became louder and more urgent, but I wasn't going to let her guilt trip me, not now, not after everything. Isabella has died, I said, my voice quivering with wrath. My daughter has died. Do you want to blame me? Do you believe registering a complaint was the problem? No. The difficulty was that your daughter utilized her own flesh and blood to conceal her misdeeds. She pulled the tiny kid into the ground with her. I could hear my mother-in-law's complaints and her support of Abigail, but I wasn't interested in hearing them anymore. The truth of what had transpired went well beyond her misplaced attachment to her daughter. You can't grieve her now, I continued, my voice filled with rage. You are just as culpable for Isabella's death as Abigail was. You continued lying for her. You continued defending her. And this is what we paid for. I took a long breath to stabilize myself, but the weight of it all made me feel like I was going to burst open. Do you want to know what it's like to lose a child? I inquired, my tone colder than I'd ever heard it. Try to live with the knowledge that your daughter, your blood, was snatched from you because of the falsehoods you permitted her to tell. The grief of losing Isabella is inexplicable. So don't attempt to make this about your innocent kid when you should be grieving my loss. I could hear her gasping for air, and her cries made it almost difficult to hear her words, but I didn't care. I had no more compassion for her. No compassion. I had nothing left to offer her after all that had transpired. I hung up on her without saying anything else. The phone died in my grasp, and for a long time, I stood there gazing at the screen. I didn't feel relieved. I didn't feel satisfied. I felt a horrible emptiness, as if I had emptied myself of everything and had nothing left. What had I truly accomplished? Not only was Abigail gone, but so was Isabella. I knew they were both gone. I sat back down, the weight of the stillness in the room crushing on me. My mother-in-law's wailing was still audible in my ears, but it was far now. A muted reminder that no matter how much I tried to put it all away, the reality would always prevail. Abigail died. Isabella died. They were the outcome of a series of decisions I had taken. And now there was no turning back. The phone vibrated again. My mother-in-law called back, and I couldn't bring myself to answer. What was left to say? What more could she tell me that would make any difference? I gazed at my phone for a long time. The place seemed colder than it had ever been. The quiet between us seemed definitive. Abigail was gone. Isabella was gone. There was nothing left. The phone rang again, interrupting my thoughts. I knew it wouldn't be good news, but it didn't make it any easier to bear. I paused for a second and looked down at the screen. It was the cops. Smith, I murmured, my voice scratchy, barely maintaining my calm. Mr. Smith, the cop on the other line said, his tone professional and dispassionate. I regret to inform you that your wife, Abigail, she was involved in an incident in prison. I froze. As the words entered my consciousness, the globe seemed to shift on its axis. There was a disturbance among the women inmates during their exercise time, the officer said. Abigail was sitting close when one of the convicts, a lady called Angela, began arguing with her. The situation gradually deteriorated, and she shivered her in the neck. I felt my knees weaken as I listened. The air in the room became heavy and stifling. She died from blood loss, the officer concluded. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you for the information, I said, my voice sounding strange to my ears. My mother-in-law had already phoned to notify me. The cop whispered something about the body arrangements, but I stopped listening. I hung up the phone without saying another word. I glanced over to Ethan. He had been silent for a few days, looking at the wall with faraway thoughts. But now he glanced at me, his eyes wide with disbelief like mine. We were both aware of what had occurred, but the specifics were still fresh. I went up to him, my legs shaky, and sat down next to him. She's gone, I mumbled, as if speaking it out would make it happen. Abigail's dead. Ethan said nothing at first. He only gazed forward, his expression a combination of amazement and despair. Then the tears began to flow. Why, Dad? He asked gently, his voice breaking. Why did she do all this? Why did it have to end like this? I did not have a response for him. I wasn't sure why Abigail had taken the decisions she did. I had no idea why she had thrown away everything, her family, her life, and our marriage. The betrayal still hurt, but as I sat next to my kid, I knew it didn't matter anymore. She was gone. And Isabella was gone. I drew Ethan into an embrace, something deep inside me cracking open. We sobbed together. I had run out of fury. The wrath, the hunger for vengeance, it had all been eaten up by sadness, by the death of a daughter who had never really been mine by blood, but had always been mine in my heart. I did not want to be furious anymore. I did not want to fight. I simply wanted everything to go away, to reclaim the years of anguish and grief. To reverse the decisions that had brought us here. But it was too late for that. As we sat there, holding to one another, I realized what true loss felt like. The reality of what I had lost struck me with the weight of 1,000 regrets. Abigail and Isabella were both gone. And the agony they had created could not be reversed. But Ethan was still around. He was still my son. And for the first time in a long time, all I wanted to do was hold him. I wanted to make sure I didn't lose him too. Everything came crumbling down 3 years ago, and it seems like a lifetime has passed. Ethan, standing erect in his dress whites, had just graduated from the United States Naval Academy. He was on the point of becoming an officer, just like me. The pride I felt at that moment was immense, but behind it was a sea of feelings I couldn't completely comprehend. I looked at my son, the man he had become, and all I could think of was Isabella. My darling daughter, who I had reared as my own. The grief of losing her never completely went away. The night she died, I felt as if I had lost a piece of me. I missed her every day. Then there was Abigail Complex, shattered Abigail. Despite her betrayal, she remained the woman I married and the mother of my children. The fury I felt against her diminished with time, but the loss remained. I couldn't help but wonder whether there was anything I could have done differently to make things better. But remorse would not alter the past. I had to do what I did. The judgments and acts I committed were born out of betrayal and anguish. Every part of me shouted for justice and retaliation. But in the quiet times, when I allowed myself to feel the repercussions, I understood how much it had cost me. The remorse, the loss, the gap that would never completely close. I fought back tears as I glanced at Ethan, who stood proudly with the rest of his class, ready to face the world. I'd always hoped he'd find a better path, one where he wouldn't have to bear the weight of the past, where he could build a name for himself without being tormented by what had occurred. But I knew he would. He was powerful. Resilient. He needed to be. Even as I saw him stride into the future, the past lingered in my mind. There were always times when the memories of Isabella and Abigail crept in, and the grief struck like a wave I couldn't shake. I'd lost so much, but I'd acquired something in the process: Ethan, the final piece of my family. I glanced at my kid and smiled through the tears. He'd made it. He was strong enough to tackle the obstacles that were ahead, and at that moment, despite everything, I had to trust that the future might be different for him. Thank you for watching. Can Jonathan ever really recover from the anguish he has experienced? Share your opinions in the comments. Do not forget to like, share, and subscribe for more.